I still remember the way the glass doors of Northbridge's headquarters reflected back my face that morning. 38 isn't old by any measure, but the silver threads in my hair caught the light. And for a split second, I wondered if everyone else would see them the way I did proof of experience, or as weakness. Inside the conference room, the air was too cold, the kind of sterile chill executives think feels professional. I laid out my slides, months of work condensed into bullet points and graphs. This was supposed to be my moment, the operational plan that would stabilize Northbridge's spiraling supply chain. I cleared my throat, ready to begin, when the door banged open. Sable Roth, Gavin's daughter, floated in on a cloud of perfume and designer silk. She barely looked at me before leaning toward one of the junior analysts. Her voice carried, sharp and dismissive. Who let that old woman in the room erupted in nervous chuckles. Even Gavin, my CEO, kept his eyes fixed on his tablet, lips pressed into something between a smile and indifference. My hands tightened around the clicker. Old woman. At 38. I finished the presentation without faltering, though no one listened. Gavin nodded absently. Sable tapped at her phone, the faint shutter sound of Instagram's camera echoing across the table. She was taking pictures of my slides, my work, to mock me later. No doubt, I gathered my papers with deliberate calm, ignoring the sting in my chest. Please make sure today's minutes are recorded accurately, I said, meeting the secretary's eyes. Then I left, heels clicking down the marble corridor. That night, I sat across from Helena Quintero, my longtime attorney and friend, at a late-night diner. She slid her phone toward me. On the screen, Sable's Instagram post glowed a photo of my slide, cropped carelessly, captioned, "Grandma thinks she's still relevant." Helena's voice was low but electric. "That chart she posted contains proprietary data. That's a breach of your non-disclosure covenants. Investors will notice." I stared at the phone, not at the insult, but at the graph's watermark, our confidential supplier codes. My humiliation dissolved into something colder, sharper. For years, I had built the systems that kept this company alive. They thought I was invisible. I sipped my coffee, set the cup down, and whispered, "Record today's minutes." They just broke their own covenant. And in that moment, I knew the game had only just begun, and the past was about to matter more than they could ever imagine. The memory still plays in my head like a reel I can't turn off. 3 quarters ago, Northbridge was gasping for air. Payroll was due in 4 days. Vendors were threatening to cut supply. Employees were whispering about looking for other jobs. I had already run through every model, every forecast, and every bank meeting. No one wanted to lend a cent. I sat in Gavin's office late that night. His tie was undone, his face gray. He asked me how long we had. I told him the truth without money. By Friday morning, the labs would go dark. He buried his face in his hands, mumbling something about optics and timing. Sable had just convinced him to spend $500,000 on a brand awareness campaign while people downstairs worried if their paychecks would clear. That's when I slid the folder across his desk. My money? A secured bridge note, enough to cover payroll and buy us a few weeks. Gavin didn't even read the terms, just scrawled his name across the signature line. He was too relieved to care that Helena had written every clause with surgical precision. First lien on all core IP and lab equipment. A change of control rider in my favor. No board decisions without compliance reporting. Gavin never asked. He assumed I was just trying to help. That I was still the loyal operator who'd rather hold the company together with duct tape than see it collapse. Back in the present, I unlocked the fireproof cabinet in my apartment. The signed note lay where it always had, neat inside its folder. Gavin's hurried signature dark against the page. I scanned it once more, then drafted a message to Helena. Subject bridge note activation. Body. We may be activating soon. When I hit send, my pulse didn't quicken. It slowed, steadier, calmer. The next morning, as I walked through the office, I noticed something small but vital. A group of junior engineers nodded as I passed. A quiet smile from payroll. Even a whispered thank you from an exhausted lab tech. They still trusted me. Months earlier, many of them had handed me their proxy rights in disgust after Sable's vanity round had diluted their stock. They saw through the facade, and they had chosen me to carry their votes. I tucked that knowledge inside like armor, between the debt, the proxies, and the covenant breach from Sable's recklessness. I was no longer invisible, and the cracks in their empire were starting to show. It was Aaron Mehta who came to me first, head of R&D, steady as stone, the kind of man who never raised his voice even when experiments burned out. He stopped me in the hallway one morning, his eyes heavier than usual. "Leora, we have a problem," he whispered. Glancing around before guiding me into an empty lab, he laid the file on the counter: purchase orders, test schedules, supplier memos. Sable signed off on an untested reagent batch, he said. Pushed it straight to production without QA. The supplier has flagged it as material misconduct. They're threatening to cut ties if it isn't withdrawn immediately. I scanned the papers, my stomach tightening, though not with fear. It was clarity. 1 week ago, Sable's Instagram post had already leaked confidential slides. Now this a supplier covenant breach. One could be waved away as arrogance. Two, back to back, formed a storm that couldn't be ignored. That afternoon, I met Helena at her office. She adjusted her glasses, tapping the documents with her pen. 2 defaults in less than a week. No cure period survives this. You know what that means. I nodded. It's no longer about what they think of me. It's about what the contracts say. Later, in my office, I pulled up Slack. Aaron had told me Sable bragged openly about bulldozing compliance like a champ. The arrogance was breathtaking. I downloaded the entire thread, each message a nail in her own coffin. The next morning, Gavin cornered me in the corridor, his voice low but sharp. "Leora, step back. Let me handle this. You're making things worse." I met his eyes. "Steady. You signed the bridge note. You pledged the assets. You don't get to ignore that now." He stiffened. "You wouldn't dare." I didn't answer. Instead, I walked straight into the board secretary's office and filed the paperwork. Under my secured rights, I called for a special committee session. Helena would chair it. The default clock was ticking, and the fate of Northbridge Diagnostics was shifting into my hands. And as I left the office, I could already feel the tremors building toward the boardroom. The boardroom felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves anticipated a fight. Gavin opened with a practiced tone, palms raised in a plea. "Let's not overreact. Sable can handle this. A coordinated PR campaign will reassure the market. We'll spin the supplier issue as innovation, not misconduct." The investors shifted uneasily in their seats. One cleared his throat. "A PR campaign doesn't fix covenant breaches." Another muttered about regulatory filings. Gavin ignored them, turning toward me as though my silence was the obstacle. I slid a folder across the polished wood. Inside were dozens of proxy assignments, each neatly signed by employees who had grown tired of watching their equity diluted into nothing. I let the papers fan out for everyone to see. These proxies represent a majority of staff shares. They've asked me to act in their stead. A murmur rippled through the room. Sable shot up from her chair, face flushed. "You can't do this. You're just operations. You don't run this company." I held her gaze. "I don't have to run it. The documents do." I tapped the signed bridge note, then the supplier warnings, then the proxies stacked beside them, effective immediately. I'm invoking the secured rights Gavin signed. We are forming a special committee. Helena, composed as ever, stood and took her seat at the head of the table. As counsel, I'll chair. The committee is empowered to address the defaults under contract. Sable's voice cracked as she tried to shout me down, but the room had already shifted. Her tantrum was just noise against the weight of signatures and clauses. I spoke evenly. You have 5 days to cure the breach. That means millions in cash. Up front. If you can't, the secured assets transfer as agreed. The silence that followed was thick. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped back. One by one, the investors filed out, some shaking their heads. Gavin lingered, staring at the stack of proxies like they were a betrayal carved into paper. As the room emptied, he leaned close, his voice barely audible. You'll ruin us. I gathered the papers, tucking them into my briefcase with steady hands. No, I said softly. I'll save what deserves saving. And when I stepped out into the hallway, I knew the countdown had already begun. The first fracture showed in the supply chain. Vendors who once extended generous credit lines now demanded cash on delivery. Orders stalled. Lab managers called me in whispers, afraid to admit that reagents were running low. Then came the insurance notice coverage suspended until compliance disputes were resolved. The company's lifeline was shrinking by the day. In the middle of this storm, Gavin found me in my office late one evening, his usual confidence stripped away. He closed the door, voice low. Leora, just a week. That's all I'm asking. 1 week to pull funds together. You've always been loyal. I looked at him. This man who had signed his name without reading, who had allowed his daughter to treat governance like a toy. You don't have a week, Gavin. The defaults don't wait for feelings. His shoulders sagged, and for a fleeting moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. The next day, Aaron slipped into my office with a sealed envelope. You should see this. Inside were receipts, large transfers funneled into something Sable had called a brand lab. Designer furniture, influencer contracts, luxury packaging experiments. Not a dime for R&D, all vanity. I tucked the papers into my folder. Proof, neat and undeniable. That weekend, I flew east for a conference. In the quiet of the airport lounge, a familiar face approached Eli Navarro. Years ago, Gavin had dismissed him as not polished enough for senior strategy. Now, Eli wore the tailored suit of a man who had proven every doubter wrong. He represented Meridian Health Tech, a competitor with deep pockets and clean reputation. He extended a hand, steady, respectful. We've been watching Northbridge unravel. Meridian is interested, but only if jobs and labs are preserved. I studied him carefully. Unlike Gavin, he didn't waste words. His offer was real, grounded. I lifted my coffee as turbulence rattled the lounge windows, rain streaking the glass. Prepare your bid, I said evenly, quietly. Eli nodded once, understanding the gravity of silence. When I boarded my flight home, I knew the cracks in their facade had become fault lines, and by the time I landed, the tremors would already be spreading. The town hall was supposed to calm the staff, but I knew better. Sable had insisted on hosting it. Streaming live from the glass atrium, she strutted on stage with her microphone, designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Her smile was wide, too wide, like a mask stretched thin. We don't need dinosaurs slowing us down, she shouted, her voice echoing across the atrium and straight into the live stream. The words landed like knives, followed by laughter from a handful of interns. My name wasn't spoken, but everyone understood. Phones buzzed almost instantly. In the corner of my eye, I saw supplier reps and a local journalist watching the stream, their faces tightening. The damage was immediate. By the end of the hour, one of our key suppliers sent an official notice they were terminating their contract effective immediately. I walked out into the corridor just as Helena called. Her voice was sharp, clipped. The termination confirms breach. I'm filing notice of default now. Within minutes, the paperwork was in motion. Years of governance negligence, all compacted into a single irreversible line default declared. Gavin found me outside the atrium, his face red, his hand gripping my arm harder than he should have dared. "You can't sell what you don't own," he hissed. "This company is mine." I pulled my arm free and met his glare with steady eyes. "Read the lien. Gavin, I own what you pledged. You handed me the keys months ago, you just didn't bother to look." His lips parted, but no words came. He turned away, shoulders hunched, the weight of realization pressing down. By sunset, Helena's email reached the full board. The subject line was simple: devastating drag-along sale. Process initiated. I sat at my desk as the sky outside turned violet, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. Employees whispered in the halls, some anxious, others relieved. Upstairs, I could hear Sable shouting through closed doors. I folded my hands, breathing evenly. The choice was no longer theirs. The process had begun, and there was no undoing it. And as night settled over the city, I knew the next battle would be fought across the negotiating table. The negotiation room felt colder than any boardroom I had ever stepped into. Eli Navarro sat across from me, calm and deliberate, his pen poised but untouched. Behind him, Meridian's team waited quietly, their confidence unshaken. I leaned forward and placed my list on the table, 3 non-negotiables. I said, "First, every lab employee stays. No layoffs. No trimming the people who actually keep the science alive. Second, a $2 million education fund for technical staff tuition, certifications, growth. Third, an ethics charter built into governance. No nepotism in executive roles. Ever again." Eli scanned the page, then lifted his eyes. "Done." His answer was immediate. No hesitation, no grandstanding. He knew the value of what he was buying. Before the relief could settle, Gavin burst into the room, his face storm red, Sable trailing behind him like a shadow clinging to power. "This is theft," Gavin shouted. "I'll bury you in court. We'll file injunctions. Drag this out for years." Helena, seated at my side, didn't raise her voice. She simply opened a slim folder and slid it across the table. Instagram NDA breach. Supplier misconduct notices. Slack logs bragging about bulldozing compliance. Proxy assignments signed by over 50 employees. Injunctions don't stand against this weight. Mr. Roth? The room went silent except for the steady tick of the wall clock. Gavin's eyes darted across the evidence, rage crumbling into something closer to fear. Sable crossed her arms, but the defiance in her face looked thin, fragile. Later that night, Helena and I sat in a diner off the highway, the kind of place with vinyl booths and buzzing neon that cast everything in electric pink. I cupped my coffee, staring at the rippling surface as trucks roared past outside. "You'll never be their hero," Helena said, her voice gentler now. "They'll call you ruthless, cold. That's the story they'll tell when they've lost." I stirred the cup slowly, watching the swirl of cream dissolve into darkness, then let history call me precise. I answered. My tone wasn't anger, it was certainty. The clarity of knowing exactly where this road led. And when I left the diner, the ink of signatures already loomed on the horizon. The boardroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers and the faint hum of the air conditioning. Gavin sat across from me, skin ashen, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Beside him, Sable radiated fury, every gesture sharp. her fingers drumming against the polished wood like a warning she couldn't back up. Eli Navarro sat with quiet composure, his legal team ready, signatures prepped. Helena leaned at my side, calm but watchful. Every clause already rehearsed, every move accounted for. When the documents were placed before us, Gavin's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. "This company was mine," he muttered. I didn't answer. The silence itself was an answer. Before he could continue, Sable erupted. "This is theft. You manipulated everything." She jabbed her finger at me. "She doesn't belong here." Helena opened her folder with deliberate care and slid a single sheet across the table. A transcript, time-stamped, preserved. Sable's own words from the town hall, mocking me as a dinosaur, bragging about bulldozing compliance. The page might as well have been a mirror. Sable's face flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. One by one, signatures filled the pages. Eli's neat strokes, Gavin's reluctant scrawl. Finally, the pen lay before me. I picked it up slowly, steady, and signed. With that line, Northbridge Diagnostics was sold. The announcement spread like a spark in dry grass. Downstairs, employees erupted in cheers, relief washing over faces that had carried too much fear. Suppliers sent messages of congratulations, contracts reaffirmed within hours. For the first time in months, stability returned to the foundation I had built. The final terms were delivered without ceremony. Gavin would remain as a powerless advisory figure, stripped of authority but offered a title to save face. Sable was handed a separation agreement with a strict conduct clause. Her influence severed. Cameras flashed as Eli shook my hand, as Helena gathered the papers into a neat pile. Through the noise, I let the smallest whisper slip past my lips, meant only for myself. This wasn't revenge, this was correction. And as I left the boardroom, the weight of signatures behind me, I knew there was still one decision left to make about what came next. Months passed, and the dust around Northbridge finally settled. Eli had asked me more than once to take a formal title in the new structure, a corner office, a seat that would cement me as the face of the transition. I declined each time. I didn't want to be remembered as a replacement CEO, another name on a long list of figureheads. I wanted something that would outlive the headlines. That's how Quiet Iron was born. We rented a renovated library downtown, a space filled with oak shelves and sunlight through tall windows. Instead of books, the shelves held laptops and prototypes from women who had been dismissed as too old, too strict, or too slow to lead. Mid-career operators, scientists, and managers found here what no boardroom had ever offered them, a place where their experience was power, not liability. Eli visited one afternoon, walking among the work tables with curiosity. He leaned against a desk, arms crossed, and studied me with that mix of respect and disbelief he'd carried since the sale. "You could have had millions more," he said. "Why leave it on the table?" I smiled, sliding a folder toward him. Inside was the clause Helena and I had drafted quietly, buried deep in the final terms, a royalty stream from every diagnostic kit Northbridge produced, not loud power, not a title, enduring influence woven into the company's very future. I didn't walk away from anything. I said, I chose the leverage that lasts. Later that week, the story broke. News anchors called me the woman mocked as too old who reshaped an industry. They showed clips of Sable's insult alongside footage of Quiet Iron's launch, drawing the contrast that had always been there, vanity versus endurance, noise versus substance. That evening, I stood in the library as the last of the Accelerator's fellows packed up their things. The city lights glowed through the windows, reflecting against the glass cases where contracts and prototypes were stored side by side. I whispered to myself the truth I had carried since that first insult in the boardroom. They said I couldn't build the future. The future disagreed. And with that certainty, I turned off the lights and stepped into the night, ready for what came next.